There's the Housing Authority of the Town of Greenwich, municipal improvement to Armstrong Court.
Technically, it's not 7:15 yet.
By the time he gets there, to
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. For the record, John Tessie. John Tessie representing the applicant, Housing Authority. This evening with me is Mr. DeAndrea, our engineer, and also we have representatives of the Housing Authority here to answer questions. As you all know, we were before you back in your December meeting with respect to this application. At that meeting, the Commission left the matter open for our team to address a number of questions that were posed during that meeting and subsequently, and also to secure essentially two types of variances from the Board of Appeals for our project. And as you all know, the Board of Appeals did grant the variances, which were essentially for both height and for the number of stories for our buildings. Essential grounds for the granting of those variances had to do with topographical changes, slopes, if you will, on the properties. We obtained the unanimous approval of the Board of Appeals for those variances. With regard to other issues, we also appeared before the Advisory Architecture Review Committee. And again, I think as you all know, the Advisory Architecture Review Committee did, I'll call it conceptually, approve the project in terms of its architecture, with the caveat that we would go back essentially as we work toward construction drawings, which is pretty typical. Now, this application was and remains a preliminary site plan application together with a special permit being required for a number of reasons, as you know, under your regulations, having to do with multifamily use in the R6 zone and also our bulk, primarily.
I'm sorry, the last one.
Bulk, B-U-L-K. Bulk. So I'm not sure of the timing on that special permit. May need to be withdrawn because we'll need to come back to you should you grant to us a what you call a proceed to final on the preliminary approval. But if that's the case, we'll obviously come back with a final application and a new special permit application. I am very well aware that there's been a fair amount of interest in the project from various segments of the public. We're aware of questions that have been raised with respect to the history of the site, not so much with respect, in fact, not at all with regard to where we are proposing to add buildings, which is along the west side of Hamilton Avenue in front of our existing buildings, and also, of course, renovating our existing buildings, as you all know. That area is substantially rock, as our engineer, Mr. DeAndrea, will tell you, except for the buildings proposed to be constructed. New buildings proposed to be constructed on the south side of our property, essentially east of Building 1, where we do have a lower area, a depressed area, but obviously not a wetland. Other than that, up on top, if you will, as we head north, we have a fair amount of rock in that area. With regard to questions that have been raised as to the history of the site, those questions, to our knowledge, relate to the area essentially to the north and west of where we are proposing activity. As you all know, our original application called for a proposed elderly building to be built in that area, and we have since withdrawn that application in terms of both change of zone and also the site plan special permit application itself. So we're concentrating our development of the property in terms of both redevelopment of existing buildings and the new development along the, if you will, the east portion or northeast portion of the property. I think you're all familiar with the number of units and what we've done in that regard. I'm happy to take you through it, but what I thought I would do is get Mr. DeAndrea up here because he's put together a fairly comprehensive history of the property graphically based upon aerial photos going back to actually 1934. And in that regard, I think it'll be most helpful because, as we all say, picture's worth 1,000 words.
Let's get them up.
Let's get them up. That's what I say.
You can pass them. Six of them. You can give it in your packet. We'll pass it around.
Techie. Okay, I'm good. You said to follow it on my iPad, and I'm all set here.
Good evening. My name is Tony DeAndrea, and I've been working with the Housing Authority since the onset of this proposal. And our concentration, of course, has been on the civil aspects of it, civil engineering aspects of it. I think the rest of us are considered civil in our mannerisms, but we hope that can be conceded tonight as a starting point. What I would like to do for you is review what I've just given you, which is a series of 4 overlays of existing mapping that's readily available from state archives, DEP, and the town of Greenwich GIS. What we're able to do with our expertise is to use state plane coordinates and accurately overlay the property line onto the GIS, which you also know is based on state plane coordinates. So the first panel I have for you is one that dates back to 1934. And what we've done is take the town GIS lot lines, superimpose them over the 1934 aerial mapping of the site, and highlighted in yellow is the outline of the 14.86 acre site of the Housing Authority. There have been several allegations over time of this application that there was a pond within the area of the Housing Authority property. It's just not true. And I can show you why. You look at the property within the yellow line, and you'll see that all the textures and colorations on the site are the same. It was an open field. There's nothing dark. Now let's look at what a pond looks like from the air. That's the 5.4 acre pond, Muskrat Pond, that ultimately becomes the town transfer station. That's very visible and evident to the west of the Housing Authority property. Dark compared to the property within the yellow line, which is obviously fields.
And is that, what's the waterway there? That's, I'm sorry, and then that's,
I'll give you a little more orientation. So within the property, you'll see the thread of Tom's Brook coming down, first heading east and southeast through the center of the property. That's the dark line that basically cuts off the western third of the property. Currently, that's at the bottom of the steep topography, which defines that western portion of the property. And the overall site plan, I can pull that up for you later, but you'll see that that property rises up to the west, very steep. At the bottom of that hill is this dark line, which represents the watercourse. What you don't see right now very clearly is anything in the way of a channel heading south from Booth Court into the property. You'll see that there's no discoloration, no distinct line like you see with the aerial mapping of the brook that comes out of the pond. Along the southern portion of the property, you'll see another dark line that represents a wall or a hedge line, again indicating that that was open field and pasturing more likely than anything else. And I just want to keep emphasizing that. So you focus yourself on that little egg-shaped pattern of light coloration south of Booth Court, which has been alleged to have been a pond.
Dick, what was it when you were young?
Nothing. Is this the time to ask you, in the wetlands permit, apparently it does refer to a wetland that has been infilled? Yes, it is.
Mr. Clausy, in his commentary, suggested that that might be the case, but I'm showing you that this is not the case. There was not a wetland on our property filled in. What was done, and you'll see that later on in the next photographs, was the excavation of a channel from Booth Place south to carry the runoff, which comes off of this heavily developed neighborhood of Booth Place, Booth Court. Okay, I'll show you that in a
Do you
moment.
have any sense of why Mr. Clausy believed that a wetland?
He didn't say he believed it. He just wanted to investigate whether or not there was. There was an allegation. He suggested that we investigate it. We've been investigating it. They gave us the permit. There was no activity over there. We did not fill it in. The Housing Authority didn't fill it in. I'll show you why we can prove that.
Okay.
Then I'm going to take you down. That was 1934. These came from the state archives. You have a similar panel up on the wall in the Wetlands Agency from 1929. It was a mosaic put together from all those photographs in 1929. Next photograph I have for you is 1951. Again, what we've been able to do is superimpose the outline of the property. We've shown now that in 1951 there was ongoing construction of the Housing Authority development. You'll also start to see now, if you look carefully, the ditch that has been constructed or excavated from the south of Booth Place heading into the main thread of the stream, which has never changed since 1934. It's exactly the same thread of the stream coming out of what was once Muskrat Pond. And again, that's that dark 5.4 acre piece. In 1951, you'll see that there was a significant amount of activity ongoing in what was once Muskrat Pond. That's not the Housing Authority property, and it's clearly seen that it's outside the limits of the Housing Authority property. No one will doubt or argue that there was a lot of construction in what was once Muskrat Pond. Then what I've given you is something that works really well on the computer, because you can go back and forth from photographs number 1 and 2 in that packet that I sent you, and it just by scrolling back and forth, you'll see that so-called pond, which I know to be a field, or I believe to be a field similar to everything else that was on the property at the time, is now still in the same configuration. You'll see that it's over the area, which is now an open field.
Can I just ask you a
Yes,
question?
sir.
How closely do the Tully borings come to that light gray
Okay,
area?
I'm going to show you now that you've raised the issue. I'm going to give you one more thing. And while when you reproduce them after you take the original, you put them on the copier, they come out a little bit striated. However, I was on site to the west of the basketball court, sports court, whatever you wish to call it, visible on our plan, located by survey methods, and the test hole was excavated. I took a photograph because we dug this thing almost 10 feet deep. And what you're going to see here is just striations of muck, black muck. And very, very top, you'll see a couple of feet of miscellaneous fill. And at the bottom of this photo is water. You can see water in the bottom of the hole. There's 8 cars.
You're finally doing something useful.
Did you ever attempt to impose the borings over that particular,
No.
because they seem to be, okay.
There was an effort when, and I didn't coordinate the Melicantelli excavation, but I observed 5 holes.
Yeah, we've been.
Two of the holes were excavated on the westerly side of the thread of the stream coming from Booth Place. So that's the water course that comes south out of the 24-inch pipe and heads down right along the fence that's shown in the overall aerial photography. and that ditch is excavated right through this channel and discharges into the main thread that comes out of what was once Muskrat Pond. The photograph that you have was taken to the west of the basketball court, and it was excavated basically just arbitrarily. We want to dig here because we're not looking to hide anything. It's just arbitrary excavation. I had directed 2 holes on the westerly side of the stream or water course coming out of Booth Place because there was a reference by the allegations were that there was a filled-in pond. What we found there was blasted rock of significant depth recorded on my site plan. And those things were, again, part of the effort just to disprove that there was ever a pond there. It was never deleterious material. It was blasted rock and gravelly material. There's just no doubt that that was the conditions here. However, on the east side, where it was alleged there was a pond, there was just this depth of 8 to 9 to 10 feet of muck, and you see water at the bottom. So we're very comfortable that that was all original ground. Not to say that it wasn't a low area, because it is. We can see from the topography. But based on the photographs and the data that we've produced, it's very clear that that was not a pond on this side. The other photos that I gave you were to reinforce the location of this allegation of where the pond was. And you can see when you overlay the last 2 photographs how that's currently a field and a basketball court. The stream is still the same as it ever was in 1934 coming out of the former Muskrat Pond. So in conclusion, Muskrat Pond was definitely filled, and it's now the site of our transfer station.
And there's still a small wetland at the transfer station.
There is some. There is a water course. There's a settling basin that was part of a design by others. I don't know who did it or when, but that was some time ago.
Okay.
And there's still a small wetland area on the Armstrong Court property in the back.
Yes,
there. Small wetland.
There is a water course coming through, and adjacent to that is some wetland. What do I want to call it? Buffer. Adjacency. There's soils that are adjacent to the water course that would be classified as wetland soil. We're not in that area. We're not touching it. We don't have to deal with it. We're not going to affect it. But what I wanted to give you just one more set of photographs.
Yes.
Again, similar to what we've just done. And these two just confirm the overlay of the original Muskrat Pond. And it's for you to see in the shadowing on the second sheet how much area that was. To put it into perspective, the pond area was about 5.4 acres. Our site is 14.87. That makes the pond 36% of the area of the housing authority. It was a large pond. It's no longer there. That's where your pond was filled in.
Okay.
What's your helper? We'll take that.
Sorry.
The shadowing of the form.
All right. So now you have,
So the first photo shows the area of the pond taken from the 1934 aerial.
plus
And then
the,
the second one is a shadowing of that
okay,
overlay.
okay.
So you see how large it was, and when you look closely at that photograph, you see how much of the transfer station is encompassed in that pond.
Now, Mr. DeAndrea, when people testified in December, there was a reference to open pits that were made and some sort of pond that was later filled in, into which was dumped toxic waste from this vacuum cleaner factory. Do you have any idea where these dump pits were, these toxic pits were for Electrolux?
Ms. Alban, I was not around in 1951.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm just a young man.
No, but this is supposed to be in the early 70s, I believe.
But I'm also smart enough to know that there was a pond there, because I've just shown you how there was a pond of 5.4 acres, I can deduce that most likely those references are in the area of that former pond. There was no similar situation in 1934, 1951, or through 2013 that there was ever a pond on the Housing Authority property. There was a 5.4 acre pond adjacent to the Housing Authority property. It shows very clearly in 1951 that it was filled in, and it remains filled in. And that's where the pits must have been.
But if I may, in December, and I've got the transcript, Mr. Lauersdorf testified that dumping took place in the area of the proposed parking lots for the senior housing.
That's incorrect.
That open pits were also made. That is incorrect. Do you know where that dumping took place?
No, I do not.
Well, then how would you know that it's incorrect?
Because I can tell you, and I've shown you from the aerial photographs and the history of those photographs, are very clear. There never was a pond on.
I'm sorry, Mr. DeAndrea, you didn't hear my question. He did not say in his testimony that they were dumping into the large pond. He said they made pits, and I can read you the transcript, that they made 3 or 4 pits into which they dumped this material. And aside from the big pond, there was some sort of small water course. But my question is, do you know for a fact that this dumping of the Electrolux waste was not on the Armstrong Court property?
We've excavated 3 test pits in the closest proximity to the area of the transfer station and the former muskrat pond. We did not find any evidence of any toxic waste dumped in those areas. What Mr. Lauersdorf may have alleged was that there were pits. He has absolutely no idea where they were. You can deduce for yourself, and I believe you will ultimately, that the 5.4 acre pond was filled in. If you were going to fill in something, would you bother to go over on an adjacent piece of property and dump material? No, you wouldn't. You would continue to fill in the 5.4 acre pond. That's the logical approach that you must make on this and come to that conclusion.
You just mentioned that there were 3 pits done.
We did.
Where?
As I said, there were 2 to the west of the stream, the thread, or the water course. We'll call it a brook.
There were 4 in the Melick report.
I didn't witness all of the Melick test holes.
We have
they were there for
their
different
data.
reasons. Yes.
We have their data.
Yes. The 2 that we excavated, that I was on site for,
I see.
on the west side of the channel, carrying the water from Booth Place area. We're in the area to the west of the water course that carries the town drainage from Booth Court south to the main thread of the stream. So there were 2 over there. And then there was one that I observed, as evidenced by the photo, to the west of the basketball court paved area.
Okay. But there were 4.
There may have been another one that he did. I wasn't there to observe those. That was not my
And those
job.
are the, we have a report
Yes, sir.
from him, and
Yes, sir.
those were dug to a depth of over 10 feet. Some to 10, 6.
That's one of the photos that's a photo of one of those holes that I observed.
Okay.
And I think that what I saw as an engineer, a professional engineer, that was natural material. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of test pits, and I know what natural material is.
Why don't you folks come on in and sit down? There are plenty of seats here.
But that concludes my presentation. It's just to show you, based on the history that's very evident from the aerial photographs, that we had nothing to do with taking originally, and very clearly show that there was a pond of 5.4 acres on the town property. It's no longer there. It was not there in 1951. Yet in 1951, the conditions changed only to bring a water course from the Booth Place south into the main thread of the stream that formerly and continues to this day to drain the former Muskrat Pond.
Okay, Mr. DeAndrea, before you sit down, just, I just want to read you what Mr. Lauersdorf said. Where they want to put the parking down there at the bottom of the hill, which is on the housing property, there used to be a pond down there. All of the drainage coming out of the incinerator used to go into that pond. I don't know how deep they went to take the samples. And again, you're saying 10 feet. He says a resident told him 3 feet. And then he goes on to say that he worked there for 7 years. This is in the 70s. And what they dumped down there is unbelievable. Now, then he goes on, in 1975, when they filled it in, do we know what was filled in 1975?
The evidence shows that the filling was done prior to 1951.
Okay, so now he's working there at the time, and he says that there's something that got backfilled in 1975, and he understands, as he says here, that the housing authority, I'm sorry, Mr. Tessie, I'm reading the transcript, that the housing authority was pushing to open that up again and take all that out, and it was never done. So that's what I'm trying to understand, is what the location of that was. He was working there in the 70s, not in 51, and what the location and what transpired there. And now before
Before you
that,
speak to that,
now there's something that we have.
so this is a document that came in from Mr. Michael Finkbeiner, who you've heard speak on this issue. This came in this evening, that he's put into the record, and I'm not sure if he's here, but I would like to just read what he had said on this issue. He said he testified on February 10th that the dumping location for Electrolux liquid waste was on Armstrong Court property. I had asked Otto, who's Mr. Lausdorff, to show me the exact place, and he pointed to the painted field stake for test pit number 1, the closest to Holly Hill and most alarming as to test findings. That point was in the pond as depicted in the 1958 tax map. However, after I spoke, Otto took me aside, I believe as a matter of concern for his personal liability, and told me he dumped the liquids on the Holly Hill property adjacent to the line. Given the apparent pond excavation to the limit edge of the Armstrong Court property and the adjacent downslope into the water, it is not clear exactly where. Further, Otto, as a non-surveyor, does not have the professional qualification to resolve the property boundary issue, only to express his opinion of where it was. Further, Mr. DeAndrea confirmed to me on February 10th that the test pit symbols on either his map or Malik Tully's map had not been surveyed in the field as to location. Therefore, my entry with Otto onto Armstrong Court property, blocked by the warning letter for no trespass and the lack of an accurate survey of the staked test hole, a definitive determination cannot be made.
Now, is that where he makes the comment about what Deep has requested?
Yes, then a little bit later on, he says, Peter Hill of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection requested an answer to the same location question. Due to the above, which I did not communicate to him, the dumping location and test pit remained to be accurately surveyed.
The test pits, first of all, you'll read the first half of Mr. Finkbeiner's current letter, and it's an obvious retraction of the fact that Mr. Lausdorff is not a qualified professional to document anything that he alleges. That's the first part. Second part is we are no longer working anywhere in the northwest corner of the property. We had no reason or need to document the locations of the test pits. Were not germane to this application. They are just not germane to this application. The transfer station is the site in which all the dumping was done. You cannot argue with the photographs that are very clear evidence from the archives of the state of Connecticut and our own files, our own town files.
How accurately, since the test pits are located on a drawing done by Malik Tully,
Yes.
there are no dimensions to them, but what would be, do you have any feeling about
Yes.
how close
If
those
I look
are
at it,
to the actual
I can answer that.
locations? Oh, sorry.
What Mr. Maitland has asked me to look at is a plot plan prepared by Melick and Tully and Associates, PC, and it shows test pits in the area of the proposed parking area, which was on the proposed on the westerly side of the water course that carries the town drainage from Booth Place south into the thread of the stream that comes from the former Muskrat Pond. He also shows two that are on the eastern side of that area, and they were west of the basketball court. I observed one. So those are the four. He's indicated graphically where they are on the west side. I was there for the excavation. That's where the stone rubble and the gravel material was encountered. Came to the east side of that water course. I dug the one, took a photograph. It was 10 feet deep. It was muck. And I find that those are relatively accurate representation of where they were because we had the evidence of the basketball court to guide us in the approximation of where the test holes were done.
You can see shaded in red there the locations which I believe, although they're not identified as such on the drawing, the locations of the existing buildings. Does
Yes,
that-
but Mr. Mason, what doesn't show here clearly on his sketch, but which we know from having been there, is that the basketball court was a landmark that we could all reference to. And as engineers and surveyors, we can approximate where those test holes were.
That's not on his drawing, I don't think.
It
is?
No, it's not, because it's shadowed underneath the parking. But we could transfer that to a drawing. It's very clear that it was not in the former Muskrat Pond.
Katie, can you tell me, just for the record, because it wasn't totally clear, we had a meeting approximately 2 weeks ago where we heard a witness state certain facts, which frankly to me, and I know from Margarita's comments, were very impressive as to what he remembered. Apparently, from a letter that I got it only today, from Mr. Finkbinder, where in effect that witness recanted his testimony. He said I think Mr. Finkbinder said, took me aside and told me, in effect, contrary information. When did the Planning and Zoning Office, actually get notified by Mr. Finkbinder that his witness had, in effect, recanted?
There's a letter that, the one that I just read into the record, that came this afternoon.
We got it late today by email, but...
That came this afternoon at 3:58.
And yet, yesterday, we spent a great deal of time, Margarita was very concerned, and I appreciate her view about what this gentleman said, and we discussed it. Has anyone asked Mr. Finkbinder what the delay of about 10 days or 12 days from when the witness for us recanted his testimony and when we were notified of the recantation?
No.
Okay, Mr. Tessie, let's go on.
Outrageous.
Well, as you just heard, we tried to address this issue, irrespective of its relevance to the application, as thoroughly as we possibly could. And Mr. DeAndrea, I think it's self-evident, has done a remarkable and thorough analysis going back 80 years, right, or 70 or 80 years, count up my fingers, to establish certain facts based upon his opinion, based upon his certainly his professional capabilities. We're not here to dispute people. We're not here to engage people in a debate. We're just trying to show you the facts as best as we can, and for you to import the logic that Tony asked you to import to this. We would like to continue to move forward. This project is important for the Housing Authority, and it's important for its residents at Armstrong Court, and it's important for the town. As I said earlier, this is a preliminary application. I believe we've established enough information for you that really would allow us in many instances to obtain a final approval, but we're at the end of the time period in that regard, so there is a little bit of another bite at the apple, if you will. We have to come back to you if, again, you would agree with us that we are qualified at this point under your normal standards to move forward. Go ahead. Sorry.
We had discussed the possibility of since there is construction, even though it's been stated that there is no construction over there, there is in fact construction.
Yes.
The stair towers are being built on the two most affected buildings at least by just looking at the grades of the site, would probably be on building 1 and 2. And it seems prudent to get some additional borings in the areas where those stair towers are going to be constructed, and the borings, just to I think to assure all of us that the site is as safe as it appears to be. This is the opportunity now to, I think, gather some additional information to truly make it crystal clear. And that would be some additional borings along those three, and especially building 1, which is low and is somewhere in relationship to Tom's. Secondly, even though it's alleged by you, and it would seem by common sense that the townhouse buildings being built on the southeast corner are also free of any contaminants, why not put it to rest at this stage of the game and do a couple of test pits over? I mean, I know that test pits have been dug for the analysis of where the rain gardens are going to go and whether they will function in that location. There was however, no environmental analysis done on those pits. That would resolve that. And leading in from that, sort of going to the next step, it's a question that since we're changing the roofs on these buildings to be pitched roofs, there will be leaders and gutters to take the rainfall as opposed to roof drains on a flat roof, which exists now. How is that going to be handled on the site? Is it going to go down to splash, or is it going to go down and be collected in a...
Well, they're all
Same, how
the
can
same
you use
system
the same
as
system?
exists.
They're pitched.
But while he's coming up, let me respond to your comments about these test pits. There's a normal 2 points. One is there's a normal construction protocol, as you know, when you are excavating, and in that regard, we'll follow the normal construction protocol. That is, if there's any suspect soils, they're tested. If they're not, they're ordinarily not tested. Insofar as a question actually that was raised by Katie today. Earlier on in terms of our financing, what is our what will the lender to state require? And the answer is they certainly will require hazardous materials analysis and the normal, what we call the phase 1 or the phase 2, basically a phase 1 analysis. So if there's any history of dumping in that area, then we would need to test. So there are layers of protection here. And it just, for us, it gets to the point, every time you ask us to do something, it costs money.
I understand.
And there's a practicality about it all. This is so remote from the area in question, and even farther remote because part of the question's already been, withdrawn in terms of, again, the logic of it all and the history of it all concerning Muskrat Pond. So, yeah, it just gets to a point of balance. So here, and it said if it's obvious there's an issue, we would test.
I don't think what Mr. Maitland said is very costly, is it?
Yeah, it adds up. I mean, thousands of dollars or thousands of dollars.
But if you have
Where do you
to
draw a
do the
line?
testing anyway for the state funding, when do you propose
No, I'm not
that
saying we do
happens?
testing for the state funding. I'm saying that there's a normal protocol.
And I thought the normal protocol was what you had just said.
Protocol
was the
is
phase
that
one and
if you
phase
have
two.
suspect soils, I'm sure Mr. Fox is
why don't
familiar
we
with
go
that.
on
If
that
you have
step?
suspect soils while you're excavating, then you are to obviously stop the excavating and test the soils.
So I missed something here. I thought both wetlands and the Department of Environmental Protection had asked that it be ascertained where this dumping took place or
No.
where the infill was.
No,
Okay. Well,
neither
still
one of
would
them
like
actually, just for the
Why
record.
don't we hold on that for a little bit and see, anybody else, does anybody would like to talk?
No, just a second. I'd like to get the
Mr.
resolution
DeAndrea
of
wants
this-
to going to
drainage.
answer the questions regarding the roof drains. That's what
Yeah.
you wanted to know.
I do, and I have some other small issues on the site, but I'd like to go to the drainage issues and how that's going to be handled off the roofs.
Within the criteria of the drainage manual, we're supposed to maintain as much of the existing system as possible. So we have an existing system to carry the roof drains from the flat roofs out into a system for discharge into this storm drain.
Right.
We're going to maintain them. If they're already on the ground, we're going to maintain those. We'll make that specific at the final design, but that's the idea. Maintain
but-
existing systems for
You
discharge.
maintain, it's a flat roof now.
But it still has to come down and get out sooner or later.
Roof drains are more than likely in the center of that.
But they
You
ultimately discharge to an outside discharge point. That's what we want to do. We intercept that, and when they finish the design for the roof gutters, we'll carry them over and discharge into the same
How are you going
system.
to carry them? That will be a very interesting thing to see when you come to us for final.
At some point, after they come down through the middle of the building, they go out somewhere. We intercept that line, and that's our discharge point. Our
So you're
job
going
then
to
is
take
get
something
roof
from the
leaders.
outside and take it into the building, midway in the building or something?
No. Ultimately, on the backside, let's say on the backside of Building 1, there's an existing storm drain that carries the interior roof drains down and ultimately out into the brook.
Right.
So we want to replicate that discharge point or maintain that discharge point. And if we have to put a gutter in the front of the building and along the back of the building, they will be carried around and discharged out. We haven't finished the final designs of those, but that's the
That will be something that will be,
on the plans.
and there will be no other additional excavation or anything, no underground, anything.
Within the
Okay.
the
well,
practicality of digging next to the building, yes, sir.
You'll show us, but,
Yes, they have to be on the
You'll
finals.
see that.
okay.
Okay. Are there any comments from the public?
Mr. Chair, while we're waiting for someone to come up on that, just to Mrs. Albin's point, the Wetlands Agency has issued a permit on this property, and there are no requirements from them that additional testing be done. Peter Hill, who is a gentleman I referred to before from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, his official comment to me was, it appears that this is a local issue and no comment on any of these issues having to do with soils. And I would also like to
What
know.
about the sentence you read where that was the person who was asking you about the location of the?
That was Mr. Finkbeiner's letter, saying
Oh,
he was the one who had
Mr. Hill.
testified that,
So
right.
we need to hear from Mr.
Right.
Finkbeiner.
And lastly, I just note that there is a comment, as you know, from Amy Siebert, who is the Commissioner of Public Works, who is an environmental engineer. It's dated March 6. It's part of the staff report. And in that memo, she addresses the comments about the Melick-Tully report, and that the report did not find any exceedances of Connecticut's remediation standard regulations, and as such, no additional testing would be needed as a result of that. And she echoed what Mr. Tessie had just testified about as to when you do testing, which is if there is a question of contamination, or if you're removing soils off-site to determine where they would be disposed.
Right, very good, correct.
Would you make sure we put that letter from Ms. Siebert in the report, please? We need to hear from the public now.
I think that's a great idea.
Pardon me?
I agree.
Good.
Sit down.
Mr. Maitland had said he had a few other questions.
I do, but they're, at this stage of the game, that we'll chat to about after others.
Yes, sir.
My name is Michael Finkbeiner. I'll be very brief and just address the issues at hand. I'm speaking in behalf of the Booth area neighbors. We have had a great deal of discussion about the Holly Hill property, and nothing going forward in these remarks applies to Holly Hill. We're going to speak exclusively about the Armstrong Court property. I think that Mr. DeAndre has given you three material misrepresentations. When I appeared here in February, I gave you a map with my land surveyor seal and signature as a data accumulation plan based on the 1957 or 58 era Greenwich official town tax maps. That's in the file as a matter of record. It shows as plain as day that this triangle had been excavated for a pond. We will submit further documents showing the wetlands violation that occurred as a matter of record in the Wetlands Agency files for the filling in of pond, and an inspection done by Michael Aurelia and Ray Vallette as town engineer, noting that that excavated area was required piles driven 25 feet, and the Melick-Tully report, as Mr. DeAndrea stated, shows that once you remove the clean 6.5 feet of overburden from the pond filling, there is, in the pictures we can show or in the report, and certainly in the Wetlands Agency files, evidence of a much deeper body of water contained in the Armstrong Court property, tight to the boundary line of Holly Hill, that is a pond, and that's the subject of this discussion. Not Holly Hill, but what happened on Armstrong Court. There was a stake put in the ground that represented, I believe, the location of your test pit number one, or Melick-Tully's test pit number one. Previously, Mr. DeAndrea said that every shovelful was observed by them and that he was present to testify to this. but we're going to show you a photograph that draws into question who took the samples. They were taken on a Friday, October 24th. It is not a normal procedure for licensed environmental laboratories to accept samples of this sort on a Friday, for the simple reason that the things that are under investigation, volatile organics, pesticides, can all be changed over a weekend's time. Therefore, who took the sample, the time and date of delivery, and the temperature of the soil is a critical factor for honest testing. That information is contained in a chain of custody document that has been referred to again and again, except the document is missing. We didn't, as soon as I received the original report, I contacted Melick Tully, we contacted the laboratory that did the work, and we contacted the Housing Authority to ask for a clarification of 12 points. Each of those points would knock out this test as a test you should accept. We're claiming that this is a flim-flam being executed against you, and we have yet to receive a rebuttal from any of the 12 points, except with regard to the licensure of Melick Tully to perform this work.
Just
Yes.
to read into the record then, from the memo from Amy Siebert from DPW.
Yes, I'd like to address that as you read it, or after you read it.
Read it. DPW sees no reason to question the results of the Melick Tully information. The work was done by professional engineers, and whether they are from New Jersey, California, Massachusetts, or some other state, they can take samples of soil characterization and compare them to relevant standards and provide the analysis to their clients. And then it just goes, well, her final sentence is irrelevant to that discussion, but DPW has reviewed the Tully report, and they don't see a reason to question it.
We'll provide an answer to that.
Okay.
But there were no answers provided to the 12 causes of possible action that we raised regarding the report.
Why do you think that Ms. Siebert would write a memo like that to us for our guidance?
Well, I think the answer to that, I'm not going to attempt to speak for her, but let me note that the allegation is that the Department of Public Works accepted possible toxic waste shipments after the Clean Water Act of 1972, either with or without manifests and proper transport documentation, and that the Commissioner of Public Works accepted those for dumping adjacent to the Armstrong Court boundary. Now, the Commissioner at that time was...
You have read...
One second, Dick, because this disturbs me. Are you suggesting at this point that Amy, you're questioning, I'm sorry, are you at this point questioning Amy Siebert's integrity?
No.
I'm not complaining about it, I just want to understand what you're doing.
I'm claiming that Mr. Perna was the commissioner at that time, and that during his tenure as commissioner, the acceptance by the town of those shipments became subject to regulation that was not observed.
Okay, thank you for the clarification, but I think what Commissioner Maitland asked you is why you believe that Amy Siebert, who's now the commissioner, would have written such a memo of, in effect, assurance or reassurance to us. And I think what you cited is perhaps, I don't know the facts to judge it, the conduct, perhaps, of a prior commissioner or department under his leadership. So do you have anything that you'd like to advise us on why Amy Siebert would write? One second, just please, because this, I find this kind of conduct very disturbing, because we now have a highly respected town official who may be wrong. But what I'm sort of hearing from you is, and I'd like to know if there's any evidence that her of lack of integrity, which would give rise to this letter that or memo that Dick Maitland just read.
Well, in this memo from Amy Siebert, she alleges that my allegations are incorrect because I have characterized Holly Hill as having unremediated embankments of ash against Tom's Brook. And she flat out denies those, saying that they are covered and capped by asphalt. And I'm saying that you...
You weren't going to talk about Holly Hill a minute
Yes,
ago.
well,
So-
I'm trying to... that part is about Holly Hill.
No other reason that you would care to advance to suggest to me as a commissioner or this commission as a whole that Amy Siebert's motivations, understanding, and integrity is in question. Is that a fair thing to say?
With regard to Armstrong Court, yes, but...
Well, that's the subject. I'm not talking about... this is not a press conference by Hillary Clinton.
What was not revealed in the record is that the Wetlands Agency made a determination that firms that are unlicensed in the state of Connecticut for environmental remediation will not be allowed to collect these samples for this type of testing. And samples that I, for example, have been customarily collecting for many years were rejected because I don't have the same license that Tully does not have.
I'd like to stick to their report.
Yes, okay.
So
Yes,
they did 4 test pits.
yes.
And of those 4 test pits, one went to 10 foot 5, one went to 10 foot 8, I believe, and the other 2 were at 10 feet. Is there anything in any of the, you've obviously seen the report.
Yes.
Does anything in that report tell you that there are suspicion of some contaminants or anything in the soil?
Well, if you look at the laboratory page,
Yeah.
past Appendix A2, you will see that the depth is specifically called out as 3 feet for test pit 1 and 4 feet for pits 2, 3, and 4. And since we know that there is 6 feet of clean overfill over this pond area, they essentially took in the middle of the clean fill and presented that to you as representative of what we think is
So you think that
underneath.
this drawing that I'm looking at the log of their depths of the boring on the test pits is incorrect?
Well, number one, everybody agrees that
12
no
inches of
survey was
topsoil,
performed.
is that incorrect?
No, excuse me,
12 inches of topsoil, is that incorrect?
no. But we don't know where the test was dug because
Well, we know it
Mr.
was in-
DeAndrea says it didn't need to be surveyed. And if you look at the date on that map, it's dated September, if you have the title block for that.
Actually, the map is dated November the 7th, 1914, or 2014. I lost 100 years there somewhere.
All right. Well, the point is, everybody agrees the survey has not been performed. It was requested in the staff report that it be performed. I am blocked from performing the survey.
Do you have any reason to suspect that the test pits identified on their drawing have been erroneously located?
Yes, I do, because they conflict with Mr. DeAndrea's site plan.
He doesn't show them on his site plan as far
He
as
has
I
an
know.
LID site plan that shows the 2 test pits on that side of the brook, and I presented that
Not in
information to you in
anything-
February.
Well, not in anything that we've got, I don't think. Was that for the elderly housing?
It's the LID site plan as a part of his
Oh, okay.
plan
well,
set.
Before Mr. DeAndrea, I have a question I'd like to
But
ask him.
my last point is on the conclusion then from Tully. They conclude, no elevated PID readings, staining, or odors were observed in the materials exposed at the test pit explorations performed for sampling. In addition, the samples subjected to laboratory testing as described in our report did not detect any compounds at concentrations above the current Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection direct exposure for soil residential criteria.
That is false. They do not address their exceedance of the chromium standard. They say that Connecticut has no standard for chromium. And yet, when I brought to the attention of the Housing
Is that a
Authority,
correct statement or not, that they have no criteria for the chromium standard?
the Tully report purports that Connecticut has no standard for chromium
That's it. And you
in
say,
this context. It absolutely does.
okay.
It has
So
2
you are
standards,
disagreeing with their report?
to say the least.
Okay. I think we're...
That was one of the 12.
Hey,
I have a
guys.
question. Excuse me. I have a
Okay.
question for Mr. Fink. Mr. Finkbeiner, first place, let me say that I commend your integrity by bringing to our attention through the memo that we got today of an inconsistency. What I find very disturbing is you brought before us, and I'm sure that you believed what he had to say. I'm sorry, what is Otto's last name?
Lauersdorf.
Yes.
I was right, okay.
Mr. Lauersdorf is here and can
Oh, yes.
speak for himself. And
okay.
I did not
Well-
use the word recant.
Okay, well,
He did not recant anything.
Miss. Okay. This gentleman who I think you referred to as a client in your
Yes, I'm
most
representing
recent memo, it is,
Him as a
came
neighbor.
under your, well, neighbor, client, maybe sometimes it's interchangeable, came before us 2 weeks ago, and gave certain testimony, which at least some of us on the commission, I don't want to speak for the entire commission, but found very disturbing.
I believe you're referring to December 9th.
Well, then, I'm sorry, then it was even December 9th, was that there?
Yes, Mr. Lausdorff
as
testified
we
on
get old,
December
you know,
9th, and Mr. Fink.
Okay. Anyway, and we've read and spent a lot of time yesterday in our briefing session rereading and discussing that testimony.
Yes, and he's here to speak for himself.
I keep hearing that, but on the other hand, you have also spoken for him. My understanding from your memo, or whatever you want to describe it as, that you sent to Planning and Zoning today, is that the gentleman had taken you aside after the meeting, and let's see, I don't need to characterize it because we all have copies of the memo, but if necessary, we can read it into the record.
It's been read.
Pardon me?
It has already been read,
Okay.
but mischaracterized.
Well, it may be mischaracterized, but that's why we're here, to try to separate the wheat from the chaff. But nevertheless, what my concern is in the intervening period, and yes, what I'm going to come is even worse because in my senescence, perhaps, I thought this testimony only taken place 2 weeks ago, and it was, of course, much further along, that you first brought this to our attention. And whether you want to call it a recanting, a changing, a less than confidential, lower degree of confidence in what happened by the gentleman, that you just brought it to our attention today in a memorandum. And I'm wondering why, since you were advised of this information, which you felt in all integrity to bring to our attention today, why you did not bring it to us attention when you first found out about it.
Well, if you remember, I spoke on February 10th. I did address this. Mr. Lauersdorf pointed to a specific stake that we believe marks test pit number 1. I asked him point blank, is that where you dumped the material? He said yes.
Okay.
I believe that stake to be on the Armstrong Court property. So it's not a question of where it was dumped, it's who the owner of the specific site is. I testified to you in behalf of Mr. Lauersdorf that he said he had accepted material on behalf of the town of Greenwich from Electrolux and dumped it on the Armstrong Court property. Immediately thereafter, on February 10th, Mr. Lauersdorf said to me that he thought he had dumped it along the property, and on the map that I presented to you, which Mr. DeAndrea did not even reference tonight, but it is as plain as day on the map, the pond goes up to the boundary of the property. And therefore, in answer to a question I received from Katie about 5 o'clock tonight, and from Peter Hill in the state earlier, thank you. We are trying to establish where these shipments hit the ground, and then when they hit the ground, did they run into Tom's Brook? And from the evidence we presented, we believe there is contamination on the property of Armstrong Court as a result of this. There's no recantation of that.
You're an excellent advocate for your cause, and I think that's commendable. It seems to me, from at least my reading 2 or 3 times of your memo that we got late this afternoon. It brings into doubt the gentleman's testimony, and maybe I'm unclear as to when he told you this, whether it was after the February 9th meeting or back in December of his concern.
right.
That may be the excuse for my having it on the wrong date. But I am curious about why you felt, on the one hand, duty-bound to send us a memorandum at 5 o'clock today, and not having informed us when you began to appropriately have doubt as to the efficacy and truthfulness. I shouldn't say truthfulness, because that implies intention. Let's say the efficacy of your client's testimony.
Well, I specifically, face-to-face, standing here on February 10th, asked you to give me permission from the Housing Authority to go and access that point so that it could be accurately surveyed and we could determine it. And you told me, we don't have that authority.
When you said we, or me, do you mean
You.
me personally?
You, yes.
I don't think the record will show that, but it doesn't matter.
Say that.
Look, I think,
Brooks?
guys,
Brooks?
excuse me, did you want to say?
If I could, I believe that yesterday we raised a lot of questions, and I believe that Ms. DeLuca was in correspondence with Mr. Finkbeiner today, and then he was responding to Ms. DeLuca. I don't think that he unilaterally happened to do this at 5 o'clock today.
Right, and I think that's a fair statement. The question came up at the briefing yesterday. I went back to the December 9th hearing, because that's when the testimony really was most in-depth about the issue. It frankly wasn't that clear from the testimonies, from the transcript, which is why I reached out to Mr. Finkbeiner and asked him more specifically.
Okay,
And that was later this afternoon.
thank you. Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Oh, I have much, much more. But in the interest, I said there were three material
Mr. Finkbeiner, before you
misrepresentations.
proceed, I'm looking at the chain of custody.
Yes. May I see?
There are 4 test pits. Like you said, it was done on a Friday. It says that it was received at the lab that same Friday in a cooler that was 4 degrees Celsius. The question I have is,
May I comment first that this is?
Oh, yeah.
We have been asking for this for months.
Mm-hmm.
We got stonewalled by the Housing Authority. We went to the FOI Commission. The FOI Commission has scheduled a docket number for a hearing on the failure to turn this document over. So,
What's your point?
what I'm trying to say is that it seems from reading this is that they got it in on Friday. It was cold. The only issue that I see of the issues that you brought up was that the test pits themselves were a little shallow here, according to the chain of custody.
3 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, and 4 feet, just as I said.
Okay. I thought they were much deeper than that.
Yes, you did, because that's what you were told. That's what Melatelli said, but the chain of custody says otherwise.
Guys,
The sample was
I don't want
taken-
to back
Let me
and forth
just
on.
clarify something.
Go
The
ahead.
sample was taken at 3 or 4 feet. The test pit was 10 feet deep. When they test for soils, they look for evidence of issues, and that's where they take the sample from. That's why there are 2 different depths on this report and the bearing of soil boring log.
We're not prepared right now. This is a preliminary application. And we heard what you said. If you have any additional information, you said you just want to give us a couple of comments. Make your comments now.
Well, I'd like, what we were leading up to is that we were denied access to this document, even though it was
I heard you say that.
reportedly given to you and the public on November 17th. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Lauersdorf, and he can speak for himself. I want to reemphasize the technical issue is the location of the boundary, not Mr. Lauersdorf's opinion of where he put things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Lauersdorf, where are you?
Hiding behind his beard.
Good evening. I don't know. Where would you like me to start?
That's up to you.
Okay.
You can start by talking about your beard if you like.
I want to move to Alaska, so
Put your
I'm
name
starting
on-
early.
You have to put your name on the record.
Yeah. My name is Otto Lauersdorf. I reside at 22 Booth Court, Greenwich.
Can you speak up a little? Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Otto Lauersdorf. I reside at 22 Booth Court, Greenwich. There are a lot of things that I've heard going on back and forth here, including on Mr. Romeo's radio program and so forth. I don't want to point fingers at anybody. I mean, this is, like Hillary Clinton said, what difference does it make now? But it does make a.
Be president.
It does. I don't think she'll make it. But
Let's talk about that for a couple of hours.
come on. Not with her track record. But the thing is, it started, and we need to have answers here. I've worked at the incinerator from 71, actually from 70, but my records would show 71 to 77. And then from there, I worked with the Parks Department. Prior to that, I worked at Arnold Baker's. Prior to that, I was with RB&W in Portchester. And that was a real hellhole to work in. I mean, that was bad. Prior to that, I was with the Navy for 4 years. My rate was engineman, but I worked 3 years in law enforcement, criminology, criminal law, criminal investigation, and so forth. As a matter of fact, when I came out of the service, the town of Greenwich Police Department sent me an application. I don't know how they knew that I was with law enforcement, but anyway.
Excuse me. Yeah.
I just want to give you a little background on myself. So I didn't switch from a lot of jobs. I didn't jump around like a lot of people do today. What I saw happen at the incinerator, at that time, I didn't pay much attention to it. But now, it's a different story. It's like a lot of other places. Corporations come in, pollute the damn place, move out. Now, one of your biggest polluters in this country was the federal government before DEP was established. What I saw there from Electrolux and from the Felt Company.
From which company?
The Felt Company in Glenville. They dumped most of their stuff at one time out on the field, out in the back to be buried. And then we found out that we can burn it. When it was wet, it would burn better, get the incinerators running real well. So we used the felt to start the fires with, and dry paper and whatever else we had in there, in the pits.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can you just identify for me in this photograph if that is the town incinerator? This is looking at the 1951 photograph. This. Right here.
Yeah, that's the incinerator.
That's the incinerator.
That's the old building.
So,
Then they built a new one right next to it.
okay,
And that was automated.
okay. So this is the incinerator, and this is where you worked.
Yes, I worked in that.
Okay. Do you have any sense where you feel the dumping was?
The dumping was
based-
done right along here
Okay,
in that area, and it all leached into Tom's
Tom's
Brook.
Brook.
Now, you have to
So-
remember that in this area,
Could you verbally describe the location pointing at?
I'm looking at a 1950.
Holly Hill, or is this the?
Excuse me, who's
Just a-
speaking?
Who said something?
I shouldn't answer questions
No,
from the
please.
audience, so
No, I'd just like just for information.
Please.
Yeah, but Chris, come up then.
the thing is, we're trying to determine where it was, and it appears as if it was on the Holly Hill property and not. So I'm not going to answer any more of that. So anyway, this is the incinerator,
that's the old building.
and then the new one.
And then
So
the one
what you're
was built
saying is
next to
the dumping took place out in here.
Right in here.
Right in there.
Right in here, because the brook runs down through here like
Right.
this.
Mr. Lausdorff, could you point it out on the bigger photo
There you
behind
go.
you?
Yeah.
That would be great, thank
Okay,
you.
Perfect.
Right in this area here, there was a dumping.
You can't see through them.
Okay, well, it's off of the Armstrong Court property. It's back
Off.
on Holly Hill.
You see, okay.
Yeah, I pointed out here on the stakes that this here was where the pond was. you know, and everything leached down through here, then into the Tom's Brook again and
We
down.
can't find any evidence of a pond. Do you know when? Because it's not in the 34 map, and we
Well-
don't have it in the 51 map.
I don't have pictures of it.
No,
I
I'm
wish
just
I
curious.
did.
What's your
If I
rec-
knew this was going to come up, I would have taken pictures
No,
of
no, no,
everything.
no, no, no. Just what's your recollection? You said you worked
Yeah.
in 75 or 71 or something.
Right, from 71, 71 to 77, when they closed the incinerator down.
So you're saying there was a pond there that we...
Yes, there was a pond right here. I had to chase my kids out of there all the time, the neighborhood kids, because
We can't find it. That's the problem. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, and Mr. Lauersgrove, you said in your testimony on the 9th of December that there were some pits into which you threw the material.
Right. Well, it just leached out of the 6,000-gallon tanker or 3,000-gallon
Okay.
tanker, big tanker. And that was done right here, right in here, and it all leached into here. Now, I want to point something out. Prior to I-95 being built, all the trucks used the post road.
Sure.
Right here was a pond. There was a pond right up here where we used to go. Where we used to go skating, right in this area up here somewhere. It was called Andrew Getty Pond. There's a pond there now, but there was also a way station there. I don't think a lot of people know this.
Oh, Mr.
So
Tessie
this
may
water
remember
leached
that.
down through here also, came down and around.
Okay.
You skated. Mr. Tessie
Skated on that
remembers,
pond,
yeah.
So did I.
You skate into each other.
What
I
are
may
the,
have, you never know.
okay.
No, he's
No,
just saying,
what I'm saying is, water flows downhill. I've never seen it flow up, even though the Aztecs, I think, tried to do that. You know.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Would anybody else like to say anything? Yes, ma'am.
Well,
Oh,
I would like to say one other thing is,
Okay.
and that's
oh, his skating
referring
pond.
to
Yeah, maybe.
Miss Fortunato here. I think she was wronged on Mr. Romeo's radio station, especially pertaining to how did the lead get into her yard. Well, prior to all of this being paved in, modernized and all, prior to all this here, incinerator being paved over and modernized and blacktopped and all that, that was all dirt. Now, we know when it rains, what happens to dirt? It turns to mud, correct? You have trucks running over it, gets muddier, then you get the sun come out again. It dries up. Same trucks, same tracks, everything runs over. We have predominantly southwesterly winds here. And what happens when you have 3-4 weeks of nice 70, 80, 90-degree weather? It turns to dust with these vehicles running over. And you get a nice breeze coming. Where does it go? Right? It doesn't go that way. This is westerly, this is southerly. It comes this way. It's airborne. That's the only thing I would like to correct.
Okay.
I think she owes her an apology. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you,
Thank you.
though, even though there's been some question about your testimony. I know it's always been based upon goodwill and in the interest of the town.
Oh, it
And I
is.
want to thank.
I'm not here to point
I want to
fingers at
thank you
anybody, you know, and I don't want to
for
put
coming
blame on
before
anyone
us.
here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, everybody. Dawn Fortunato. I'm a resident of Booth Court. I'm going to read off of some papers to you because that's the easiest way for me to keep my mind here. Some of this might be a little bit redundant now that the chain of custody has come into play. I would like to quote the following. Mr. Heller, on December 9th, you said, I think we need to make a whole analysis of the Booth Court area. Aside from that, separately, Booth Court, Booth Place, Booth Terrace, someone should make an analysis there. Then again, on February 10th, you said the next step is to have a full-blown hearing on the subject, which you were happy to do. Then, while listening to the rebroadcast during the break, the microphones were left on February 10th. You can hear as clear as day Mrs. Raymer's remarks, and I'll quote, there are books written that the area is totally polluted and that the neighbors know what they're doing. After laws were enacted, supervisors overseeing the dump continue to allow Electrolux to dump poisonous waste into shallow pits dug by the town's own supervisors and employees they manage. I don't understand why Amy Sievert is so cavalier of accepting the Melick and Tully test results. She never once mentions the meeting we had with her November 3rd in the Selectman's office when Mr. Lauersdorf originally told Peter Tessie, Katie DeLuca, the RTM from District 3, and the neighbors about the dumping of the poison and his distinct account of what transpired in the 70s. Are we going to seriously rely on Amy Sievert, whose position is to oversee this?
Excuse me, just for clarifying, from who, is this your turn?
This is mine.
Yours, okay.
Are we going to rely on somebody that it's her job to specifically oversee this area? Are we invisible? Do we not matter? No, is nobody concerned about our health? November 5th, the first selectman, Amy Sievert, and Jim Michael toured the neighborhood with us. During the time, the neighbors commented about the stench. That day, we were all standing on Housing Authority property. Amy turned to us and said, well, what do you expect? You live by the dump. No offer of a solution, just no compassion. The commission should note that most homeowners that live here, we've lived here for 30 years, 30 to 60 years. We didn't ask for an incinerator. We didn't ask for a dump. We inherited it from the town. The IWWA steers clear of the property. They don't perform their jobs due to any due diligence in the area with respect to water pollution, nor are they watchmen of any of this area making sure the right thing is done. There's more than just poisoned soil here, folks. Tom's Brook is choking from fly ash, from quench water from the incinerator over the years, and the sedimentation sits on the bottom because of the town's refusal to test water and dredge. We allow it to run through Armstrong Court, Byron Beach, and into the Sound. MS4 stormwater quality reports that are MS4 stormwater quality reports that out of the sum of $250,000 the town receives annually from 2004 to present, not one single test on Tom's Brook. Not one. Where's the $2.7 million? Why is there no testing here? It's sinister that the P&Z Commission is expected to follow suit. I assure you that the truth is going to be told. It's going to come out. March 6th, Amy Siebert's she drafts a letter to P&Z bashing Mr. Finkbeiner. We have substantial evidence to back his words. The man is absolutely brilliant. As I read Amy's letter, I failed to read Mr. Lauersdorf's account of the events from 1971 to 77. Why is that she leaves out that crucial and important information? If you trust her, you can guarantee, as Josephine Evaristo said about Governor Baldwin, she's going to sell you down the river. The commission will be the patsies. February 26th, I called WGCH. I spoke with Mr. Romeo, the housing commissioner, about the chain of custody, in which he told me he could take that report and just throw it away. It's not part of their application. Why are people not giving this the seriousness that this cries out for? Was the poisonous apple not bitten from? Is there a concern for public health? The town has a responsibility to the entire community. It's not just our street or our neighborhood. It's the whole entire community. The testing is flawed. The 12-9 meeting, we argued the depths in the test pits. I said I witnessed the depth of 3 to 4 feet before Mr. Bill Huber, who told me to get off the property. Mr. DeAndrea argued that there were 10 feet as he watched every scoop come out of the ground. Well, I have a picture, and it shows the guy in the excavator all by himself and nobody watching anything. And we can give you that picture. January 12th, I emailed a formal request to Sam Romeo, the housing commissioner, their attorney, Attorney Fox, for the chain of custody. I heard nothing back from these men. I got read receipts, but heard nothing back. January 16th, I then formally filed with the Freedom of Information Commission to obtain this documentation, which I do have a copy for you. Why would they would not want to be compliant? If they had this, why wouldn't they give it up? Why would we go through all of this? It's like a game. So now I have now I have trusted our local government with the misconception that it would be the gatekeepers of our health. At the age of 36, I was overjoyed to find out I was pregnant. Just a few days following, I was told I had cervical cancer. I carried out my pregnancy of fear of not knowing if I was going to have more children or if it was going to be likely. Columbus Day 2013, my maternal organs were stripped of me. I sit idle in remission, not knowing if it's going to come back or another cancer awaits me. While recovering a month later, I am told my child has developed lead poisoning. Is this normal for a 36-year-old woman or for a child at the age of 1? I don't think it is. There's more people in the community struggling, plagued with health issues. We are talking prostate, cervical, ovarian, breast, bladder, colon. Thus far, that all affects the genitals of people living in the area. We have people that have brain and liver tumors, people with respiratory, sinus, asthma issues, neurological disorders. 4 children born on a street over all have neurological disorders, and 1 is autistic.
And one is,
Lots of people have had heart attacks. Cristiano Field, the guy lived on Lyons Avenue. He fell to the ground at the age of 51 and died of a heart attack. It's just not normal. We're living in a cancer cluster. We are living in a cancer cluster. This is a detriment to our health. In my heart, I am convinced that this area is contaminated. I don't believe it's clean. I would like to know, by a show of hands, who in this room thinks that Armstrong Court and the dump are entirely clean?
Donald.
Ma'am, that's not proper. Go ahead.
I believe we all deserve quality of life. We are not on an athletic field for a few hours a week. This is a residential neighborhood. We have to live here. I've been accused of Mr. Romeo of trying to stop the project from day one. I have stressed that is the last thing I would want for the residents of Armstrong Court. I lived in public housing. We dealt with leaking roofs, wet walls, mold, roaches. I know what it's like. I live in a house for the past 30 years, so I would want them to have quality of life. I believe that's what we all deserve. We all deserve to know that the environment is safe. This area was vacated for a reason. The senior housing was vacated for a reason. If the area were green and clean, would there have been a fight? There would have been a fight. There was no fight. It just quietly seemed to have gone away. Within days of neighbors raising concerns, it was removed from their agenda. It was for a reason, this very reason I am expressing to you all. Our selectmen quoted 1124 that it was a very sensitive area that they were seeking municipal improvement on. The selectman knows his grandparents were allowing town residents to dump on their private property, his grandparents, which is now Cristiano Field, prior to building the incinerator. In 36, the town purchased 4.3 acres from his grandparents. You can read De Palma v. Town of Greenwich. The judge rules the incinerator would beautify surroundings, increase property value, and would not be a detriment to our health. Imagine. How wrong was he? Everyone has a recollection of pollution and contamination, and when you reference the dump, you can give it a fancy name. No matter how many times we change it, it will still be the dump. As I'm going to quote Josephine again. As Josephine Evaristo said, you let us have an incinerator. We say you should let us have transparent and valid testing, where the town has someone come in and test the soil and the water, and then the residents can take samples from within these samples to keep everyone on a straight and narrow. Surely you understand why we can no longer be trusting. We did that for decades, and we have 6 people in Western Greenwich. We have denial and silence when we ask questions within our local government. We are here to remind you about the health and safety issue that is a detriment to the entire Greenwich community. You are supposed to have our health and safety paramount. We would expect nothing less of you when you have been told poison has been dumped in this area. Would any of you want to live where we do? I wouldn't want you to. Thank you for your time and your serious consideration on the matter.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak? Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Mike Warner. I'm the RTM representative from District 3, where this project is being considered. And I think we all would like to have science rule the day here and do the right thing and find and find the answers that we need to find. I think that's the direction we would ask you to go in. Speaking on behalf of my constituents in District 3, I would tell you this project would be transformative if it were approved. It would be a major improvement for not only the look and feel of that neighborhood, but for all of Greenwich. And I would hope that after doing the proper science, you could find a way to make this happen. It's too big and too important, not only transforming the lives of the people that live there, but transforming a project that was built in the post-war era that we would all like to see improved, and I hope you would find a way to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
First thing, Chris.
we should have made a
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. For the record, Ken Rogozinski. I speak to you this evening. Rogozinski.
She didn't ask you to spell it. She just asked you whether you can.
You're not going to ask me again where I went to high school, are you? I speak to you this evening with regard to this application in my capacity as a member of the POCD Housing Task Force. I would encourage the Commission, as they evaluate this application, to think about the priorities that the Commission set in 2009 when it adopted the Plan of Conservation and Development, specifically with regard to Section 3, and I'm looking at the plan now under a heading called Protect Subsidized Housing. The paragraph from the plan reads, "The Housing Authority of the Town of Greenwich operates about 1,000 units of housing in Greenwich, including subsidized, affordable, and market rate units. The authority would like to find ways to expand the number of housing units on its properties that it currently owns to satisfy the demand for affordable and subsidized housing. The Housing Authority of the Town of Greenwich has an extensive waiting list. Its efforts should be encouraged in order to provide a diversity of housing." In fact, action items 3.6 and 3.7 of the 2009 POCD state that 3.6, the Housing Authority of the Town of Greenwich should partner with public and private groups and agencies to provide subsidized housing, and 3.7, to encourage subsidized housing in areas that are served by transit and owned by the Housing Authority of the Town of Greenwich. My second point here is that in this room are 3 other members of that committee, including one of your commission members, Ms. Albin. Also, Mr. Warner, who just spoke, was a member of that committee as well. I can tell you that the number one concern that we heard from the 20-plus representatives of the Town of Greenwich who were nominated by the selectmen to that housing task force was, what can we do about Armstrong Court? That is the face of affordable housing in Greenwich, and something needed to be done to change that face. Here we're presented with an opportunity where between state funding and federal funding, over $20 million can be brought to this project in terms of fresh capital to be able to make the transformation that Mr. Warner just spoke about. And I would hope that you all would consider those points and the 2009 POCD as you deliberate this application. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nicely put.
Yes, sir.
Okay, this is the dregs now.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, I'm Chris von Kaiserling, District 8 RTM. I think most of you on that dais up there know me well enough to know that I've been a bit of a community stickabout as far as causing uproar and attention and making sure things don't slip by. I don't think anybody's accused me ever of being reticent or quiet when I think there's
Other things, yes, but not that.
Yes.
I make this.
So therefore, having spent 30 years as a community organizer, although I'm not yet president, I think I can speak to the tactics that are being happened here. I understand what's going on. We have a few citizens of our town who have had a very hard time in their life with some personal experiences. That makes it very emotional, makes it very tough, and in those lives, I can certainly sympathize with it and my compassion. But we're now dealing with a much larger, issue and a much wider-based problem. You're not sitting here as counselors for people's well-being or their psychiatric or psychological feeling or emotional comfort. You're here to decide very tough questions that affect thousands of people. And I'm afraid what's happened here is there have been a lot of assumptions. There have been a lot of suppositions. There's been a lot of mostly, I think it's called conflation. Conflation is where you take various disparate things and you squash them all together in one pot and come out with an emotional, overwhelming feeling of something's wrong emotionally. It's certainly almost the opposite effect of what you hope for in an intellectually objective and honest assessment. First of all, we have the Holly Hill Recycling Center. I never thought that was quite the right name. I thought it should have been named after Speedy, but in any case, the dump. And I was old enough to remember the days in the dump when they just had a big field there and people backed up a truck and they dumped it there. I remember that. I remember the incinerator. I remember all of that. I was there. I can say that I breathed the dust, which may explain some things. But I'm really upset at this seemingly, self-important idea that everybody in the municipal and state government is incompetent except for me. I just don't understand how the federal government, the state government, our town government, our officials are paid for this. People have certificates. People are certified. People have reams and reams of experience, are just so incompetent and really have some conspiracy out there that's going to flim-flam, I think was the term, which I take great exception to, the public. I don't find the Housing Authority as a flim-flam organization. I think to even characterize this as the impression it keeps getting built that you cannot have confidence in what they say, you cannot trust them because they have these ulterior motives that they're hiding and they're trying to slip something by us. Quite the contrary. I've sat through meetings and meetings and meetings of this, both residential, private, and our government buildings and constructions. There are protocols on how we go about it. Probably, if you look at any town anywhere in the United States, you're going to have problems with this because before 1970, there were certain things that are normally dumped where they are. People threw automobiles into ponds. They did all kinds of things that was considered normal. It's going to be an after effect of that. We know that. So we could go out and test everywhere in Greenwich right now and make sure everything's safe. I don't think that's really a very viable or sensible or intelligent way to approach it. What the Housing Authority did, in good protocol, like you would expect for anything, in preparing for this project, they did their proper due diligence soil sampling with a properly certified professional, which was certified by the state, certified by our local municipal authorities, certified by all of these people, except apparently one professional in town who didn't understand what Mr. Fox explained, the different depths and why you would have 3 feet and 10 foot. I find that odd for a person who's so professional, so experienced that we should take them above all these other people that he didn't know that. So that's the first problem. I think the other problem is we have this cancer cluster in Booth Place. It keeps coming up. Lead poisoning, all kinds of things happening, right? All in Booth Place, not in Armstrong Court, not by Cristiano Field, not up on the next street over, or on Booth Place. If we took the same logic that these people are presenting to you tonight, then if you did want to do your proper authority and your proper responsibility to the public, I think the town should have Booth Place evacuated, have it condemned, and tested until it's cleared. That's basically what they're telling you here, is that we have this apparent situation. It all centers on Booth Place. Maybe it's Booth Place that's the problem, not the others. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case, but I could make a logical point that way or argument if you follow it down the way that they're following down the way on testing at Armstrong Court. First of all, we're not talking about Armstrong Court. We're talking about the dump. There's a barrier between the dump and Armstrong Court. Armstrong Court was a woodlot before they took it over for Armstrong Court, for the public housing back then. There was nothing.
Woodlot?
I believe it was a woodlot. And there was no farming there. You have a problem at the high school with arsenic because they had orchards that filtered. Well, I'm saying, but all of this, and this is all weighed against a town that professes to be very kind and caring for its needy and less fortunate. We want to build affordable housing. We had a whole hearing the other time about this idea of workforce housing, a whole complex of trust funds and all kinds of things for that. Here we're talking about thousands of people that are already there throughout our housing authority, And apparently they're not competent enough to take care of these people, and we should not let them go forward, and we should endanger the situation because we should go around drilling more holes everywhere. The reason we don't have that senior housing, by the way, is not because of some conspiracy. It's because there was a timeline in applying for grants that they needed to finance it. And this was going to take too long to go through this, dragging fish hooks through this process that people were doing, by which time the time would have expired and they couldn't have gotten the grant. They'd be wasting your time and their time, so they withdrew it for that reason. Not because they're venal, deep, underhanded people who are lurking in the dark to take advantage of everybody in town for some reason we don't know. And I will also say that I take great exception to the characterization of Miss Seifert. Miss Seifert is an extraordinary woman. She may not always be the most comfortable to sit with, and she can be a little prickly. But by God, that woman is true, to the point, honest, knows her stuff, professional, well-based, experienced. There's not much more you can say for what we do. We hire good people in this town. And like Katie, for example. Oh, sorry.
Who'd do anything.
But we have competent people. We pride ourselves on it. We pride ourselves on having a well-run town. We pride ourselves on having quality of housing. And yet, in 20 years, the Housing Authority hasn't really been able to produce housing. In the last couple of years, they produced several dozen of housing already. They're moving ahead. This is the thing we should encourage, not discourage, by allowing people to have an emotional binge on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. What I'd like now, for any comments, we respect comments and like it, but let's not repeat, okay?
I'm Sylvester Pecora Sr. I'm the Chickahominy Neighborhood Association. And I wasn't going to get up until I heard...
Is he a head of it or a member of it?
I'm the chairman of the Chickahominy Neighborhood Association. Spell my last name? P-E-C-O-R-A. People from outside Chickahominy come in and talk about what should go on. I kind of resent it sometimes, especially when they say that it's only on Booth Place. I know of a lot of sicknesses that are just on Lyon Avenue that have happened with cancer, okay? But that isn't what I wanted to say. If the town, I believe that Armstrong Court should go ahead. I believe that firmly. I think it's important to the neighborhood. It's important to everybody in Armstrong Court. But if the town did their job of taking care of the little pond that's next to the transfer station where they drop the garbage and dredged it like they should, if they turned around and did the things that needed to be done, like the Tom's Brook where the sewer line goes through it twice, the reason they haven't been there, it's not Amy's fault. It's because you don't give them the money. And it's very upsetting to me that they keep putting this off. 8 years ago, that pond should have been dredged. That creates, from what I understand, the contaminants. And if it's full, they got to be falling all over. You got the whole community upset in Booth Place because of what you didn't do, not what you are doing. And a long time ago, I think you and I said to you, keep our community safe. And damn it, this should be done when there are things that have to be done in the transfer station, and you're holding up money for the transfer station, but yet you build firehouse, you build all the schools and everything else.
I think you're being very informative, but we are the Planning and Zoning Commission, not the Board of Escrow and Taxation or the
And the reason I'm saying it is because I got the podium.
we know you
very much.
Thank you.
You let the man speak.
Thank you. It's very wonderful to have the opportunity to speak. I am Christine Edwards. I'm also RTM District 8. I always find it interesting, you know, we talk Electrolux, we talk all these different companies. Anyone who remembers Condé Nast, maybe you remember that the linotypers were typing with lead. So all that lead was going up and over Old Greenwich and going into the air and the water and everything else. There are other companies when you have industrialization back then. But I think that the real aspect is not to, as one of our previous speakers just said, to make this a conspiracy kind of aspect. But this could be, for all we know, kind of like the little Erin Brockovich situation or a Love Canal. We don't know. With the amount of pollution that was dumped, I mean, you even look at what's happened in Stamford, in Schofield Town Road area, which was a dump, and the contamination in the wells that are up there that was hid for many, many years and is finally coming through. And I think that it really is something that we have to look at for the people living not just in Chickahominy in this area in Booth Court, but we really need to be completely transparent. And if this means redoing some of those test holes and bores and making sure they're 12 feet deep, then I think we should do that. If that means dredging these ponds and seeing what's down there, we should do that. And as was said previously, water flows, and it always flows, in a sense, downhill and down to the ponds. So even though it might have been that the Armstrong Court area was a wood lot, we don't know what was under that. And I remember areas in Stamford where they were doing tremendous dumping, and it later turned out where Rippewam was up on High Ridge Road, there were tremendous amounts of cancers among the teachers who were there that were finally coming out talking about a cancer cluster from what was dumped by CBS Lab and other labs to fill. We have other areas. 500 West Putnam used to be pretty much of a swamp. It's now quite a tall building. What was dumped there? I know rocks, but who knows what else, just like in other areas like the high school swamp. So I think that if we're going to be true as a planning and zoning committee and really want to give and serve our constituents throughout all of Greenwich, if we're going to be testing, we should go back and retest some of these areas and make it very transparent, and don't say, oh, you can't go on that land. We don't want you to test. If anything, we should bring in independent testers, maybe not from Greenwich, and really take a look at this. I think that that is the true way to handle this, and not shrub it off to, oh, it's a conspiracy theory and this people have a wild reaction. If we go by and start doing a cancer study of people in all this area, maybe we'd be very surprised, just like Love Canal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Peter Quigley. I'm speaking again as a concerned citizen, having spent 7 or 8 years as a sort of a historian on following the quality and quantity of water management issues. Speaking to Christine, this issue is not on the merits of the Armstrong Court. In fact, it is in the Plan of Conservation and Development. Thank you, and it should continue. However, one would ask, why not just upgrade it? Because what you have here is not only a quality issue in water and soil, but a quantity issue of water, okay? So it's not about the merits of the building. It's not even on the personalities, because I think you all agree mistakes can be made. There's a project called MESA, where, as I recall, this commission, along with every department, okayed it, and then suddenly there was a discovery which is costing the taxpayer about $25 million now, after it was approved because of the discovery of contamination there. So mistakes can be made. It has nothing to do with the quality of the individuals sitting before me and in the town, but clearly mistakes can be made. And what is really important here is doing the right thing. It's pretty simple. It's not the money. It's just doing the right thing. In a commercial protocol where there's a history of contamination, and if you have not been reading the papers over the last 4 months, here's a headline, a long history of environmental maladies in the Greenwich Times about 3 or 4 months ago. Here's another one, more toxic hotspots, okay? Clearly, this site has a history of contaminants. And if you're concerned about it running downhill, it's running downhill into the harbors. And for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been standing in front of this commission talking about Byram Beach. Now, suddenly, there's been a discovery that the levels of arsenic are indicating there is contamination at Byram Beach. Do you know where Tom's Brook flows? So it's pretty obvious it flows down from Holly Hill, a.k.a. the dump mentioned here. But the real issue I want to talk to you tonight is on the quantity issue, okay? The storm drain infrastructure in that area does not have the capacity, so you might want to take under consideration that there is a storm water capacity and that the water flowing through that storm drain has been cleaned, so when it ends up in the harbors, it's clean water, one. Two, the build-out of the attics. I would ask for the consideration here of keeping to the original site plan. You've got a moderate housing facility, Wilbur Cross, on the other side of town that did not build up glorious attics. And in this particular area in Armstrong Court, it is a notorious flood zone, in case you don't know this. So the build-out of impervious surface identified by the attic approvals that you might make, I would ask that you make a consideration to keep that build-out as a renovation, quality renovation, minimizing the added impervious surface of the parking lots and the added bulk of the attic space. Thank you very much.
Okay. Who's left? No, sit down for a minute. Sit down. What did everybody else? Anybody else want to talk?
Gag order, no?
What?
Gag order, but no.
No. You stroke your beard. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you. We had Booth Place, Booth Court, Booth Terrace. We never had any problems with beautifying Armstrong Court. As a matter of fact, we welcomed it. All right. The problem was the Holly Hill in that area where they were going to dig and put a parking lot and another structure. Now, a lot of places were brought up about pollutant. The Hudson River, I'm not sure, I think it was like about 30 years ago, the Corps of Engineers were going to dredge it. They took samples there and they stopped. As far as I know, they never went. And that's because of the mercury and pollutants from the battery factories that were up that area. I mean, I have a commercial lobster license. You can't clam in Byram, in that little gut area between Bellhaven and Byram and the beach area. You can't clam there. One guy did. He got caught. I'm not going to mention his name. He lost his license. And we have to take a look at what's really going on around here.
Gotcha.
We're not against beautifying Armstrong Court, like I said. As a matter of fact, we welcomed it.
Okay.
It would be great. Even putting the new buildings up in front of Hamilton Avenue there, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Tessie, where are you?
Ask him the question again. The same one. You just asked him. Get him once again.
Okay, just to correct one thing stated by Mr. Quigley.
Mr. Tessie, it's hard to hear you.
Yeah, just to correct one simple statement made by Mr. Quigley about increasing the basically the impervious surface by adding attics. That simply is not the case. We're not increasing the footprint of the attics. So just to make that the footprints of the buildings. We're not. So the attics are irrelevant to the issue. I don't really understand what he's talking about. Look, I'm not going to sit here and go point by point by point. I respect everyone's concern that got up and spoke, both pro and con. It's really quite simple here. You have an application before you that complies with the Planning and Zoning Commission requirements when it comes to site plan standards and special permit standards, period. The only issues had to do with obtaining variances from the Board of Appeals for height and attic, and we've done that. This application stands on its own as meritorious, both in terms of what it brings to the public and also its compliance with the zoning regulations. The issues raised have to do, as we all have heard, with a perimeter location of, a debatable issue concerning the filling primarily on the Holly Hill transfer station, or dump as I've known it throughout my life, property. That's what you're talking about. The issue raised by the area residents has to do with essentially a relationship with DPW. not the housing authority as far as we're concerned at all. We've tried to be as cooperative as we possibly can in all respects, going beyond really what we had to do. We need to move forward with this application. Obviously, you have to give some thought if you're going to allow us to proceed in terms of what you're looking for us to accomplish, but please bear in mind, there are parameters here when it comes to you making decisions in accordance with your regulations. There are issues here that are primarily raised that have to do with issues that relating to health and DPW, not zoning. Not zoning. Let's bear that in mind.
Could you make some comments relative to the comments made by Mr. Maitland about safety?
About safety?
Hours ago.
Always around there.
He didn't make any, I don't think he made any.
No, the only thing
questions
I
about
was saying is that it would seem, and again, given all the things that we've heard tonight, I think it would behoove all of us to get some additional borings taken specifically to determine the environmental quality of this site. I feel that the question has been raised. I don't think we can sweep the question under the floor. I don't know if there's any statistics about cancer clusters of the people who live in Armstrong Court, whether it exists or not. Maybe there is no elevated history of cancers in that particular, in that area where people live. I don't know. But it seems to me a lot of stuff has been raised, and I don't know why. It seems in the best interest of the town, of the housing authority, to do some additional borings, specifically testing for contamination of the soil. That's it. I think it is within the parameters of the site plan standards to protect the environmental quality of a site. And it's one of the standards that 615, whatever, what? Three.
I have 615.3 right in front of me.
Okay, and it reads, protection of environmental quality and the preservation and enhancement of property values. Strike the property values and just go with protection of environmental quality.
As a major objective, and then to that, you would...
That has to do with the project, sir. That has to do with the project itself.
Well, then, Mr.
I'm
Tessie,
not talking about the whole project.
I would
No,
just
I'm
take
just
you
pointing
to the
that out.
very purpose of our zoning regulations, which is to promote the health and safety of the community. And that's what Mr. Maitland is asking you. This project is such an important project for the community. We've heard so much support for it. But what we're asking you is, given the number of issues that have come up, to do additional testing. I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks.
Do you have a problem with that?
We have a problem with it. You know, it's like saying, when did you stop beating your wife? You know, so the answer is, how are you going to answer that? If you sit here and say to me, we would like you to do additional testing, and you're going to put it in your, and you're going to make it a condition, then we're going to have to review it and take that into consideration before we move forward with a final plan.
We'll just make it a condition.
But I do feel.
A couple of other minor things. I think you're right. We can deal with that when we do have to render a decision.
You have to render a decision.
So we have to close it tonight.
To proceed to final.
Just a couple of other things.
Yes.
I know that that these really are going to be mundane, and I guess in comparison to what people have been talking about tonight. But anyway, you're parking in the front yard for the new townhouses going in, and you're counting on an existing wall there. And some landscaping to screen it. Number one, the landscaping is not sufficient to screen the parking. Number two, I'm concerned about rock excavation next to that existing wall, and the wall, in fact, being either destroyed or in some way. So I think that needs to be rebuilt to be sure that it's not damaged when the rock removal takes place.
Just to be clear on one point. There's no prohibition against parking in the front yard in the R6 zone.
I think there is.
There's Section 6155 applies to the business zones.
I think in 6155 or 698 it does talk about not parking in the front yards, but okay.
Because we park in the front yard in every one of those, in every one of the projects.
Don't get hung up on that now.
Well, anyway,
all right.
The fact is you're using the wall and the landscaping
because
for screening.
they're there.
I think we need to improve that and just to make sure that the wall remains and also be rebuilt if it's destroyed due to the rock removal. And two,
right, that's not a problem.
Trees along there.
Yes,
but the trees don't screen parking, so we need something to screen the parking. That's one. Two, the sidewalk coming up in front of the two buildings on the south side, the townhouses.
11 and 12.
Thank you.
Right.
11 and 12. That sidewalk is not indicated being replaced. It should be replaced and repaired because there's going to be a lot of work going on in that area. That sidewalk further cuts through a parking lot to get out to the sidewalks on Hamilton Avenue. It should be
That's right.
clearly marked as it goes through the parking lot.
understand that.
And a safety zone.
Yeah, we understand that.
Those were the mundane things, but I do think it's important to put into the record a couple of things. Number one, that this site will be pretty well completely built out because the rezoning that was asked for originally has been withdrawn from this. And therefore, in this zone, the R6 zone, it would only permit 155 units.
That's correct.
And right now, we're building to 150. So the site is effectively built out.
When it comes to
units.
yeah, when it comes to density.
So I think that's important. That there will be no addition. Well, I guess you could still come back for 5 units, but I mean the R6.
Well, if we could have found the location for 5 units, given the need for the housing, we would have proposed them.
We'll assume
We
that
couldn't.
it's pretty well built out. I do think that DPW is since we are in the preliminary phase, that we do have a report from DPW that they're okay for this to go to final.
Right.
We have the Department of Health who is okay with this project, and even they gave us a memo regarding lead testing around the site, which they found no problem with
Correct.
that.
That's a letter in your file. Right.
We have a comment on traffic, that the additional traffic will be benign. I tend to agree with that.
Thank you.
We have the IWWA approval. We finally have an ARC approval on this project.
Yes.
We had the
But
Z.
with a return, when they're further.
Basically, yeah, but it's details and stuff and
Correct,
materials
right.
and colors and stuff.
Right,
We have
construction.
ZBA, and we have basically a sewer approval, just making sure that the lines are done, but that's standard.
That's pretty standard language. Yes.
I just wanted to get those in the record.
Okay, thank you.
And
The section.
the last thing is, I just want to make sure that in the record that you will show when if you do get moved to final, but when you come back for final, how the stormwater is being handled off of these pitched roofs.
Yeah, that'll have to be in Mr.
Okay.
DeAndrea's final drainage summary report.
Are we going to?
Because
But that's.
Mr. Marucci always insists on that in his construction drawings. He wants to see those roof leaders shown and indicate where they lead to.
Now, one last thing, we also have the MI to be reviewed this evening.
Before you go, before you leave the site,
You can.
Mr. Tessie has agreed. I'm sorry, I think it's on, but Mr. Tessie has agreed for the additional testing. How is that defined?
I haven't agreed to it.
Anything. The question is.
I just said I know it's
he
coming.
reluctantly accepts the fact that it may be a condition.
Okay.
It'll be a condition.
I wouldn't be surprised to see it as a condition.
It'll be in
Phrase
the
it that
condition.
way.
It'll be in the conditions, okay.
For sure.
Mr. Malik, the section
I
you were
just wanna-
referring to with the parking is section 6-155.
Yeah, right
The
here.
the last sentence.
Thank
yeah.
you.
The last
I just-
sentence,
I
Mr.
just
Tessie,
wanna-
is 6155.
The-
Parking for multifamily residential purposes,
Parking and
Yes.
parking areas shall be prohibited within required front yard.
unless it's
Unless the
screened.
commission finds it screened. It's not adequately screened now, so what was the purpose of my discussion?
The last section of 6155.
Last paragraph.
The last sentence section.
Anyway, that's it.
We don't have to spend,
You can believe us.
you'll.
Yes, I'll believe you. I don't see
Let's
it.
not spend time.
See, it's not always believing. Okay.
Let's not
How
spend.
can you not hear?
The people who've made comments tonight, other than the specific application that is before us, deserve some kind of comment, even though it's beyond the subject matter that's official tonight, and is certainly beyond our province and our particular responsibility. But we are totally sympathetic with all the comments made, and we so note it. And what we will do is take it to where the problem belongs, which is in the selectman's office. Okay? And I say that for all the comments made on anything other than the specific application, because we're all of us, I'm sure, are in total sympathy with what you said. Okay, I don't have to go over the specifics at this particular time, but we respect all the comments made by you people. Okay, now, I think what we'll do is close.
We'll close, and I think we need to we'll have to decide when we do take action on this, if we're going to also act on the MI.
The timelines, yes, but the timelines are coincident, so if you wanted to close and hold off your decision, you could do that.
Who are here, our procedure is to close, which means all discussion is finished. When we finish the public hearing, all the items, then we go over and vote on them. Our vote here is on approval, if you will, whether we approve a preliminary application. And I hope you understand that. Preliminary application for this, an MI for this particular site.
Final MI.
Okay? Are there any questions in terms of our action that we're going to take? Okay, we're closed, and we're going to take a 10-minute break.